What is process documentation? Hi there, in this video we'll go over what process documentation entails, how to write a process document, and the benefits of having documented processes. And just so you know, I'm the founder of Technical Writer HQ and I have over 10 years of technical writing experience that I'll be using to teach you what process documentation is. But before we fully dive into it, make sure to hit that subscribe button, like this video, and activate notifications. That way you don't miss any of our future videos, and you'll always be first in line to receive instructional content from top writing experts. Now let's go ahead and jump in. Before we jump in and answer the question of what is process documentation, we need to first understand what is a business process. A business process is any activity or set of activities that a business depends on for its day-to-day survival, and if streamlined or optimized, it helps the company with growth. For example, the recruitment process, invoicing process, order processing. These processes should have purposeful goals, be as specific as possible, and have consistent outcomes. The act of documenting a process defines process documentation. It is a detailed, step-by-step description of any type of business process. Moreover, it is a series of preliminary documents that are used to describe a process flow and specifics in a comprehensive manner. It functions as a more focused process mapping guide from the perspective of the employees invested in the process. This real-life example may come to your head when thinking about process documentation. Any kind of process that occurs in an organization, for example, restocking of the inventory, is a process. And within these processes, what role does each of those involved play? We have to document that one by one, in which we can identify the flow from start to finish so we can properly assign responsibilities. For example, Sarah had an online grocery store. Her stock came in each morning of vegetables and fruits for the day. Therefore, every activity that occurred in the completion of the process had to be first documented. First, the trucks came in. Robert was in charge of unloading and storing them. Then James had to count the numbers and enter them into the grocery management system each day. Once that was done, it was the website managers who had to play their role. They uploaded data to their online store for the arrival of fresh stock. And Facebook and other outlets were also updated day in and day out. These were some of the activities that were part of the restocking process. And the goal here obviously is to document everything so it can be repeatable. Similarly, there are other processes within organizations that need to be documented, all the way from HR to accounting to finances to whatever that may be. We must know the why of something to know its importance. So why is process documentation needed? It helps all major and minor stakeholders get a solid understanding of how a business or technical process works. And the purpose is to open the process to all stakeholders and invite critical input for process improvement. So something can't be improved if people don't know how it works. Doing this helps departments optimize processes and instill consistency in the stakeholders. Streamlining processes and making practical work more efficient is the focus of the global industry at the moment. Automation, machine learning, and agile processes are at the center of this movement. However, in order to optimize a process, you need to define, describe, and document it first. Many documents are created in process documentation to open up a process for all those involved. These include usage tutorials, policy papers, operation checklists, visual media, so screenshots, flowcharts, and diagramming, process maps, virtual workflows, and links to other sources. So processes can be showed in a variety of formats. Let's now take a business process example of a first-time user experience and how to document it using a flowchart. It starts with a user visiting the website, then the user registers. Next, they get started with the product. They set up a planning board, they add items to this planning board, and last, they purchase. This is a great example of a process that takes a user from start to finish in the sales cycle. It's essential to know the steps for creating or writing a process document. The first step is to define the process. Before you begin to develop documents, decide on which process you should document first as a priority. Once you've done that, define it clearly and with as much detail as you can. Include the purpose of the document, how it will benefit the company, and how the process itself can be improved over time. Then create a separate document with these details in it for guidance during the primary business process documentation. Now we come to step number 2 of this document writing process. It's set to describe process scope. Once you have a clear description of the project and its purpose, work on defining the short and long-term scope of the project. The project scope consists of basic details of the number of tasks and whether the task will cover a single business or technical process or a series of processes. The scope should also be its own separate document, especially for more complicated processes that will have a bigger impact on business outcomes. The third step of writing the process document is to establish process boundaries. In this step, you have to describe the parameters and boundaries of the actual process, including the starting point and end points, as well as what causes the process to start and end. Make sure to define each trigger in detail. This will allow all the stakeholders to plan successive processes around this one and gauge if the process can be streamlined via automation. Additionally, define the start and end point of each step of the process. This will allow the technical staff to see if the number of steps can be reduced to reach the final outcome that's already been decided. The fourth step is to determine the process inputs and outputs. In this step, you have to explain the number and types of resources needed to perform each step of the process and the quantitative outcome of each step. This will help the finance and resource management team members determine how they should structure the resource input for maximum gain. It will also help project the cost to benefit ratio for each process step. So in short, it helps everyone. In the long run, especially process owners and company leadership will be able to track these numbers for current process optimization and make smarter process decisions. Now let's go ahead and dive into the fifth step here. And this is to list and describe the process steps. Once you have the process foundation, start brainstorming the activities and operations needed to complete each step of the process. While documenting, some companies take this step before establishing process boundaries. This may be according to their own standard operating procedures, although it's preferred to establish boundaries first so that any step doesn't take up more time and resources than needed. The brainstorming part of the process should include all the people who have extensive know-how of the company's business needs, documenting SOPs, and all the different processes that are currently ongoing. And the next step here is to organize the steps into the optimal sequence to create a smooth workflow. To do this, consider which step follows which and come up with ways to reduce the gap between each step by implementing more efficient activities. While doing this, make sure to identify which steps logically follow each other and which go together as parallel activities. Make sure to group the latter ones together, and in case a step contains more than one activity or two closely conjoined ones, break it up into two steps. The seventh step of the process documentation is to list the stakeholders. Describe all the staff members involved in the process and process documentation. Make sure to define their roles in the process and mention their official titles, as well as their individual progress. While listing the personnel, make sure to clarify each person's roles according to their referential capacity, in case they want to reference a document at a later date. An important part of creating an effective document is step 8 here, visualizing the full process and optimizing it from a visual standpoint. This will create a mental flowchart of the process in your mind, as well as maybe something that you can actually share, as well as improve the readability and clarity of the entire process for everyone involved. In case the documentation is graphic savvy, create a uniform image of the full process in your mind and make all the charts, metrics, and diagrams according to one design principle. And just a tip here, it's often helpful to write the caption before creating the illustration. Then create the illustration that best represents the caption. This process helps you to check that the illustration matches the goal. Good captions have the following characteristics. They're brief. Typically, a caption is just a few words. Also, they explain the takeaway. After viewing this graphic, what should the reader remember? And they focus the reader's attention. Focus is particularly important when a photograph or diagram contains a lot of detail. Highly complex technical illustrations to show processes like the following tend to discourage most readers. So you need to find a way to avoid this, and we'll talk about this in just a second. Technical writers have a tendency to do this as they explain user journeys, product visions, organization hierarchy, and many more other process-oriented documents. Just as you avoid overly long sentences, try to avoid visual run-ons. As a rule of thumb, don't put more than one paragraph's worth of information in a single diagram. I can already hear you saying, but real-life technical systems can be vastly more complex than the example here. And you're right, but you probably don't feel compelled to explain real-life complex systems in a single paragraph. So what's the trick here? The trick is to whittle visual clutter into something coherent and helpful so you can organize complex systems into subsystems like those shown in the example here. When you do this, everything becomes much more easier to understand. The idea is after showing the big picture, then you want to provide separate illustrations of each subsystem. And in that way, when someone can look at the different subsystems, they can easily add that up into the entire system itself. In step 9, it is time to keep future process modifications in mind. It's important to mention any and all steps that might be exceptions to the ones listed in the documentation. This is a future-proofing method that opens the process up to streamlining in the future. If a new tech product or automation measure comes up, process owners need to be able to implement that into the process without causing extensive revisions. And for step 10, which says to add measurements and control points, in this step identify the areas in the process that are the most prone to risk and insert control points to help key process personnel monitor and modify the process as needed. Additionally, create measurement procedures that determine the overall effectiveness of the process. This will enable key stakeholders to track the performance of the process and implement improvements that best suit the workflow. Once you have a full process at hand, bring together all the stakeholders and review the documentation set in step number 11. Make the process map open to suggestions and critiques and look for any missing steps, miscalculations, and any steps out of order or general errors. And once it's finalized, test out the process and check if anything is missing or if it's consuming simply more resources than necessary. It may take some time to cover all these steps, but you'll see in the end that these steps were worth your time. The last step in writing a process document is to take the completed process documentation set and send it to technical experts for review and optimization. Your process documents are a living entity as they guide the process along and make everyone involved aware of what the process will look like at every stage. Make sure that you treat it as a living document and continue to make adjustments to it as you find more streamlined activities as well. Again, the idea with processes is to always focus on improving them as much as you can. Now let's dive into how you can improve your documentation process and generate more efficiency. So number 1, use process documentation tools such as Lucidchart and documentation software such as Microsoft Visio and Excel. And number 2, make it concise. Create documents that are as streamlined and to the point as possible. If something can be removed without affecting the overall quality of the process or the outcome, then simply remove it. And number 3, update when needed. In case the process requires a new step or you have discovered a more efficient way to complete a step, make sure to implement the update in the documentation on time. And number 4, store in a centralized location. Always have a centralized storage location for all your process documents and supplementary documents such as diagrams, case studies, and more. There are a number of process documentation tools that provide access to singular cloud storage as an enterprise package, and you can easily find them via Google. You have things like Document 360, you have FrameMaker. And number 5, use visual aids. Make the documentation visually appealing and use graphics to better explain metrics and numbers. Furthermore, use color coding and multiple platforms to explain at different activity levels. And 6, synchronize with company standards. Make sure that all documentation is unique to the company's operational standards and processes. Customize the design of the documentation according to the company design standards as well. So this may be using their corporate logo, using the correct branding colors. So find out what these things are. And number 7, add swim lane diagrams, which means distinguish the different roles, process steps, timelines, and resource inputs by adding swim lane diagrams where appropriate. And we covered that earlier by breaking out diagrams into smaller subsets. And number 8, try optimize cost cutting. Look for more cost-effective activities and programs that don't affect the quality of the documentation or the intended outcome. And 9, create templates and style guides. If you have a documentation process that has worked for you or one that you have recently optimized, use that as a template or create a style guide out of it to help recruits start using it immediately. And the last way to improve your process documentation here is to create individual documents. Instead of compiling everything into one big document, create multiple smaller ones for different processes. If you think one process deviates from another even slightly, create separate documentation for it. In addition to the above, use any existing documents to reinforce your documentation and add value to it. Existing documents could include interview transcripts, case studies, records, field diaries of project stakeholders, and any other documented process knowledge that has been accumulated over time. Regardless of how many processes are ongoing at any one time, process documentation should be a common and mandatory practice at any company. It's one of the best ways to ensure that all business processes have some measure of future proofing. And there we have it. We just finished discussing process documentation and everything that comes with it. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to go ahead and like it and subscribe to our channel so you can keep up to date with all the videos that we put out on this channel about technical writing and becoming a better writer. And again, my name is Josh. I'm the founder of Technical Writer HQ, and I'll be seeing you on some of our following videos, and excited for you in your career as a technical writer and becoming the best writer you can be. Cheers.